Where was I? After a long pause, it was moved away by someone or something underneath, and there was a dark round hole with a good deal of heat and steam coming out of it, and in the middle of the hole the head of a dwarf very like Trumpkin himself. There was a long talk here, and the dwarf seemed more suspicious than the squirrel or the bulgy bears had been. But in the end the whole party was invited to come down. Caspian found himself descending in a dark stairway into the earth. But then he came to the bottom. He saw firelight. It was the light of a furnace. The whole place was a smithy. A subterranean stream ran past it on one side of it. Two dwarves were at the bellows. Not again. Where was I? Two dwarves were at the bellows. Another was holding a piece of red-hot metal on the anvil with a pair of tongs. A fourth was hammering it, and two, wiping their horny little hands on a greasy cloth, were coming forward to meet the visitors. It took some time to satisfy them that Caspian was a friend and not an enemy, and when they did, they all cried, "Long live the king," and their gifts were noble. Mail shirts and helmets and swords for Caspian and Trumpkin and Nikabrik. The badger could have had the same if he had liked, but he said he was a beast, he was, and his claws and teeth could not keep his skin whole. It wasn't worth keeping. The workmanship in arms was far finer than any Caspian had ever seen, and he gladly accepted the dwarf-made sword instead of his own, which looked, in comparison, as feeble as a toy and as clumsy as a stick. The 7 brothers, who were all red dwarfs, promised to come to the feast at Dancing Lawn. A little further on, in a dry rocky ravine, they reached the cave of the 5 black dwarves. They looked suspiciously at Caspian, but in the end the eldest of them said, "If he is against Miraz, it will have him for king." And the next oldest said, "Shall we go further up for you, up the crags? There's an ogre or two and a hag that we could introduce you to, up there." "Certainly not," said Caspian. "I should think not indeed," said Truffle Hunter. "We want none of that sort on our side." Nikabrik disagreed with this, but Trumpkin and the badger overruled him. It gave Caspian a shock to realize that the horrible creatures out in the old stories, as well as the nice ones, had some descendants in Narnia still. "We should not have Aslan for friend if we brought in that rabble," said Truffle Hunter as they came away from the cave of the black dwarves. "Oh, Aslan," said Trumpkin cheerily but contemptuously. "What matters much more is that you wouldn't have me." "Do you believe in Aslan?" said Caspian to Nikabrik. "I'll believe in anyone or anything," said Nikabrik. "That'll batter these cursed Telmarine barbarians to pieces or drive them out of Narnia. Anyone or anything, Aslan or the White Witch, do you understand?" "Silence, silence," said Truffle Hunter. "You do not know what you are saying. She was a worse enemy than Miraz and all his race." "Not to dwarves she wasn't," said Nikabrik. The next visit was a pleasanter one, and they came lower down the mountains, opened out into a great glen or wooden gorge with a swift river running at the bottom. The open places near the river's edge were a mass of foxgloves and wild roses, and the air was buzzing with bees. "Here," Truffle Hunter called again, "Glenstorm, Glenstorm," and after a pause Caspian heard the sound of hooves. It grew louder till the valley trembled, and the last, breaking and trembling and trampling of the thickets, there came in sight the noblest creatures that Caspian had yet seen. The great centaur Glenstorm and his 3 sons. His flanks were glossy chestnut, and the beard that covered his broad chest was golden red. He was a prophet and a stargazer, and knew that they had come about. "Long live the king," he cried, "and I and my sons are ready for war. When is the battle to be joined?" Up till now, neither Caspian nor the others had really been thinking of a war. They had some vague idea, perhaps, of an occasional raid on some human farmstead, or an attacking a party of hunters if it ventured too far into these southern wilds. But in the main, they had thought only of living to themselves in woods and caves and building up an attempt at old Narnia and hiding. As soon as Glenstorm had spoken, everyone felt much more serious. "Do you mean a real war to drive Miraz out of Narnia?" asked Caspian. "What else?" said the centaur. "Why else does your majesty go clad in mail and girt with sword?" "Is it possible, Glenstorm?" said the badger. "The time is ripe," said Glenstorm. "I watch the skies, badger, for it is mine to watch, as it is yours to remember. Tarva and Alembril have met in the halls of high heaven, and on earth the son of Adam has once more risen to rule and name the creatures. The hour has struck. Our council at the dancing lawn must be a council of war." He spoke in such a voice that neither Caspian nor the others hesitated for a moment. It now seemed to them quite possible that they might win a war, quite certain that they might wage one. As it was now past the middle of the day, they rested with the centaurs and ate such food as the centaurs provided, cakes and oatmeal, and apples and herbs and wine and cheese. The next place they were to visit was quite near at hand, but they had to go a long way around in order to avoid a region in which men lived. It was well into the afternoon before they found themselves in level fields, warm between hedgerows, where Truffle Hunter called at the mouth of a little hole in the green bank, and out popped the last thing Caspian expected, a talking mouse. He was, of course, bigger than a common mouse, well over a foot high when he stood at his hind legs, and with ears nearly as long as, though broader than, a rabbit's. His name was Reepicheep, and he was a gay and martial mouse. He wore a tiny little rapier at his side and twirled his long whiskers as if they were a mustache. "There are 12 of us, sire," he said with a dashing and graceful bow, "and I place all the resources of my people unreservedly at your majesty's disposal." Caspian tried hard, and successfully, not to laugh. But he couldn't help thinking that Reepicheep and all his people could very easily be put in a washing basket and carried home at one's back. It would take too long to mention all the creatures whom Caspian met that day. Clodsey Shovel the Mole and 3 Hardbitters, who were badgers like Truffle Hunter, Camilla the Hare, and Hogglestock the Hedgehog. They rested at last beside a well at the edge of a wide and level circle of grass, bordered with tall elms, which now threw long shadows across it, for the sun was setting, and the daisies closing, and the rooks flying home to bed. Here they supped on food that they had brought with them, and Trumpkin lit his pipe. Nickabrick was not a smoker. "Now," said the badger, "if only we could wake these spirits of the trees in this well, we should have done a good day's work." "Can't we?" said Caspian. "No," said Truffle Hunter. "We have no power over them. Since the humans came into this land, felling forests and defiling streams, the dryads and naiads have sunk into a deep sleep. Who knows if they will stir again? And that is a great loss to our side. The Telmarines are horribly afraid of the woods, and once the trees moved in anger, our enemies would go mad with fright and chased out of Narnia as quickly as their legs could carry them." "What imaginations you animals have," said Trumpkin, who didn't believe in such things. "But why stop at trees and waters? Wouldn't it be even nicer if the stones started throwing themselves at old Miraz?" The badger only grunted at this, and after that there was such a silence that Caspian had nearly dropped off to sleep when he thought he heard a faint musical sound from the depth of the woods at his back. Then he thought it was only a dream and turned over again. But as soon as his ears touched the ground, he felt or heard, it was hard to tell which, a faint beating or drumming. He raised his head. The beating noise at once became fainter, but the music returned, clearer this time. It was like flutes. He saw that Truffle Hunter was sitting up, staring into the wood. The moon was bright. Caspian had been asleep longer than he thought. Nearer and nearer came the music, a tune wild and yet dreamy, and a noise of many light feet, till at last, out of the wood, into the moonlight, came dancing shapes such as Caspian had been thinking of all his life. They were not much taller than dwarves, but far slighter and more graceful. Their curly heads had little horns. The upper parts of their bodies gleamed naked in the pale light, and their legs and feet were those of goats. "Fawns!" cried Caspian, jumping up in the moment they were all around him. It took next to no time to explain the whole situation to them, and they accepted Caspian at once. Before he knew what he was doing, he found himself joining in the dance. Trumpkin, with heavier and jerkier movements, did likewise, and even Truffle Hunter hopped and lumped about as best he could. Only Nickabrack stayed there where he was, looking on in silence. The fawns footed it all round Caspian to their reedy pipes. Their strange faces, which seemed mournful and merry all at once, looked into his. Dozens of fawns, Mentis and Obertinus, and Damnus, Volnus, Voltus, Gerbus, Neminus, Nasus, and Oxcuns. Paterwig had sent them all. When Caspian awoke next morning, he could hardly believe that it had not at all been a dream, but the grass was covered with a little cloven hoof marks. And that is the end of chapter 6. And then next time, we're going to read chapter 7, Old Narnia in Danger.